Welcome back, Leominsterites, to the first episode of Representing Leominster in 2025. It's hard to believe it's 2025. I am so glad to be here with your state senator, John Cronin, as my first guest.
Always good to be here. I can't remember if this is my third or fourth time.
I feel like it's third or fourth. We've thrown in a couple, like you usually kick off the new year with me, and then we've, been dealing with some crises. So we've had you on.
Touch base, definitely. Yeah.
But so glad to be heading into a new legislative session and building upon some of the work that we've been able to take on. And I figured for this episode, as we're starting off the new legislative session, it might be helpful to orient Leominster residents to kind of where we are in the process.
Sure.
What is going on? How does a new legislative session in Massachusetts get going?
So in many ways, the House and the Senate are the same in terms of the steps that we both take to both kind of form our bodies and get to work on the people's business. But myself and yourself, my third time, I think it was your fifth term, we took the oath this year on January 1st to start our new 2-year session, which is always a thrill and a fun day at the State House. My first term was January 6th, 2021, and it felt both, different from that and a little bit the same. But so the legislature, 200 new members, 160 members in the House, 40 members in the Senate, starting a 2-year session. And both the House and the Senate now here in January and early February will conduct a rules debate. Mm-hmm. So both the House and the Senate will come together and really determine the rules that are going to govern the body and how we debate and work through different matters. And after the rules debate, and members have the ability to propose different things. So mm-hmm. like the time before a bill is read and how many hours members have to get through legislation, the joint rules between the House and the Senate, which we don't always come to an agreement with.
I feel like it's been many a session since we've had agreed upon joint rules.
So there's a big focus on process before we get to substance. So we'll conclude our rules debate over the next couple of weeks, and then, as you know, committee assignments will come out. And that's a really exciting time. Chairmanships, vice chairmanships will get distributed, and then bills will be assigned to the different committees. So all of that is kind of happening right now, and it's an exciting time. It's an opportunity, I think, for all of us as legislators to refocus on what's going to be before mm-hmm. us, what are the big issues facing our communities, and set some goals for the upcoming term.
And in the middle of all of this, we have to file all of our bills to be timely filed in Massachusetts. And something that I took for granted when I got started was that in Massachusetts, any bill that's timely filed is guaranteed a public hearing. When I met legislators from other state legislatures, I had no idea that it could sometimes be a partisan fight just to get airtime for your bill to be heard in its initial
testimony,
its initial committee.
Yeah.
So it's something that I don't take for granted anymore in Massachusetts, that we guarantee these public hearings. And in some of the rules changes that came out of the pandemic that I'm really grateful for, that have benefited folks in Central Mass and Western Mass and the Cape of the Islands, like outside of the city, has been the ability to testify remotely. And we've gotten to see a lot of Leominster residents taking that opportunity to take a little bit out of their day, their work day, their school day, to make their voice heard, because it makes it so much easier to zoom into a committee hearing and share your perspective.
And a huge increase in civic participation, right? And just the accessibility of it.
And I think it's made the hearings run a little smoother. It kind of gives, with the pre-sign-ups, it gives a committee chair the opportunity to see, like, how much interest is there? Can we give a little more time for someone sharing a personal story? Do we have to hold to the 3-minute rule or a 2-minute rule if it's a really popular hearing?
And one of the benefits, I think, the silver linings of the pandemic is we know how to do it, right? Mm-hmm. We can run hybrid hearings and receive testimony on Zoom and testimony in person, basically at the same time, as a part of the same panel, which is, I think, which makes the process more inclusive and benefits everybody.
So talking about getting the session started and introducing new bills, are there any bills that you're excited that you're refiling, or new bills that you're working on?
So I'll share one old bill and one new bill and a piece of legislation that I'm very excited about. And there's actually an article in the Globe. I think 7 other legislators joined me in filing a bill to ban or prohibit cell phones in schools during the school day. So I think it's a timely idea, but I think everybody in our community realizes that there are some harmful unintended consequences of access to a smartphone and just the prevalence of social media on youth mental health and on kids' attention in school, and the really just the prevalence of everybody having a computer in their pocket has had some good benefits, but it's had some detrimental effects as well. And so what the legislation would do is ask the Department of Education and or Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to promulgate regulations that would basically just allow kids to focus on school during the day. And I've met with superintendents and principals from across the district, and the stories I hear are just kind of alien to me as somebody who both of us were in school not too long ago. But even if you go to a lunchroom, it's quiet. It's just with all kids just looking at their phones too. So I think there's so much social benefit that could occur if kids were able to put their screens down and just focus on learning in class and instruction during the day. So I'm not aware of bills like that have been filed before, but I think there's no less than 7 bills filed by different legislators aiming to take a look at that this session. So I think it'll be a good opportunity to receive public testimony to weigh the pros and cons of any idea. Obviously there are contingencies for different health reasons, right? Kids with type 1 diabetes who use their smartphones to monitor their insulin levels. But I think that'll be an important conversation that we're going to have for the first time in the legislature this year. So that's a new one. And then an old one that I'm very excited about is, and I think we've talked about this every time that I come on the show, but increasing work-based learning experiences and opportunities for vocational schools in our comprehensive high schools. We have a huge wait list in the state of about 10,000 students who can access Chapter 74 or vocational programs. And building a new vocational school on average costs about $300 million. So it's cost prohibitive for so many communities that want to add these services. So I have filed a bill to create vocational school, basically voc school annexes, and bring that capacity to comprehensive high schools. So it costs $300 million to build a new school, and in places like South Shore and Fall River, they're doing it, but they're not adding a single new seat of Chapter 74 to address our capacity issues. The idea is if we get the trades back in our comprehensive high schools, we can tailor new programming to juniors and seniors who are going to head into the workforce after they graduate and who have zero access to Chapter 74 voc programs right now. And we can also do it in a way that's not cost prohibitive, that's economically feasible. So for $3 to $5 million, we can build a 3,000 to 5,000 square foot light construction annex where we can provide regionally aligned trades to benefit the local workforce, to benefit kids. And what I'm very excited about is, as the Senate president laid out her priorities for the session, one thing that we're going to do that we haven't done yet before is appropriate kind of excess millionaire surplus funds to one-time costs. And she's committed $50 million in the Senate budget to address Chapter 74 capacity. So I think there's a political opportunity to do that. And I think the time is right. So very excited about those two bills.
Yeah, and vocational education is near and dear to my heart because Leominster is the perfect example of getting it right with the Leominster Center for Technical Education and Innovation.
And they're bursting at the seams, right? Yeah. But I truly believe that, and I know we're both in agreement, Leominster is the model for every high school across the state. I got to attend
a traditional high school. My brother got to get his vocational education. We got to do theater. He got to do the marching band, right? My parents got to see us.
And you took the bus to the same place,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and I gave him a ride, right? When that came the option. We lived a little too close to the high school, so we never had busing.
So
we had a very, very long and steep walk up Elm Street.
Gotcha. Yeah. But how about you? What are priority bills for you this session?
So I think, access to public higher education
Yeah.
and affordability and student debt are definitely on my mind with what's going on at the federal level, with what's going on locally, and what we're learning from community college access, and opportunities to kind of expand access for communities like Leominster and Fitchburg, where it's really expensive
Sure.
to live here and to be a full-time student. And
Yeah.
how can we increase kind of access by providing some cost of living stipends for our lowest income students so they can get to that degree completion more quickly. A refile that just is really near and dear to my heart and will kind of close the loop on our work around the sexual assault evidence kit reform is lawfully owed DNA. I think we've talked about it maybe because it was a new bill last session. There are estimated 12,000 to 15,000 missing DNA profiles from our state database. They were never collected for a variety of reasons, some legitimate and some not so legitimate. But our DNA database is only as strong as it can be, like
Sure.
with actually making sure those DNA records are in that. And it's going to solve crimes not only in Massachusetts, but in neighboring states and across the country. And so we're really looking for the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to do a full public audit of what profiles are missing in aggregate, come up with a plan to collect them, and then do an annual audit every single year just to make sure we're not growing a new backlog of these missing DNA profiles. And in the communities, and sometimes it's happening countywide, sometimes it's happening within a municipality,
Yeah.
they're solving cold cases by going out and looking at serial offenders, making sure that DNA is in that database and solving
Which
other
are some
cold
incredible
cases.
breakthroughs, right?
Yeah. I think the most incredible one is the Stephen Gale case that solved a cold case from the 80s. And
Was he out in California?
he had fled the state and committed a number of crimes
Crazy.
along the way, but he
Yeah.
was found in Los Angeles. And because he had left the state, the statute of limitations told, and so he could be tried for those rapes, which is really incredible to be able to get justice for those survivors, but is also causing us to look at the statute of limitations when
Sure.
it comes to sexual violence, when there's DNA, when there's like newly found DNA evidence or a kit was never previously tested fully, the survivor reported it
Yeah.
within the statute of limitations. It's not their fault that maybe they weren't investigated to the extent that they could have been. So there are a lot of other folks leading on other kind of complementary issues of looking at kind of statute of limitations. Could we expand that in reasonable ways where we have kind of this clear evidence of a DNA profile? And sometimes in some cases, the DNA evidence actually exonerates someone,
Yeah.
right? Like, so we really need to be making sure if we're putting survivors through this incredibly traumatic experience of having a sexual assault evidence kit collected in the aftermath of a sexual assault, I want to make sure that they're actually being tested and that they're taken seriously. And so we're hopeful that this is kind of a common sense bill. I team up with the minority leader, Brad Jones, on this.
Yeah.
And it's one where we can agree, like, this is owed DNA that should have been collected and should be in the database. Let's just make sure that we've got a plan to make sure that all our bases are covered.
Well, I think one of the things that I appreciate about serving in the legislature and appreciate from your service is you've really taken, the experiences you had professionally and personally right into the legislature, and it informs all your work. So it's incredible. And
It is. My work on rape kit reform is like both really fulfilling and really heartbreaking.
Right.
With like kind of like it feels like a shuffle, like where
Yeah.
we're like taking a few steps forward, we're taking a few steps back, and like learning about other gaps in the law. And I think it's good for us in Massachusetts to continue to lead and continue to evaluate kind of our laws and make sure that they're as strong as they possibly can be. We can always do better, and it's, I think, good when often we're competing with ourselves on some of
Absolutely.
these changes.
I think one of the things that I appreciate too about serving in a state legislature is no matter what the issue is, you can look to your left, you can look to your right, you can look across 49 other states and territories and see, what are best practices that other people are doing? Are we ahead of them? Are we behind them? And there's no rule against copy and pasting. Somebody who's got it figured out and who's doing a really good job too. So. I think that's one of the interesting things of our work.
And one of the other pieces that I really love, particularly, is being a part of this North Central delegation. Like, it's been historically a really strong delegation. We have a lot of new members, right?
Yes.
Like, I'm only in my 5th term, and like, I've been around like for longer than most, and it's strange to see so much turnover. But with that came some really good new energy and expertise in a whole lot of different areas. When you're in the House or the Senate, you're kind of like jack of all trades, master of very few. Like you kind of know a little bit about a lot of different things.
And I think each of us kind of naturally has their own priorities, right? Like we find the policy area that we're most passionate about, that means the most to, this part of our constituency that we really care about. But with respect to our delegation, I mean, time and time again, we put all that aside and we come together when the region really is facing significant challenges. I think of the maternal health unit closing at Leominster and a similar event at Neshoba Valley Medical Center. We got some great news. And I know that is something that the entire North Central delegation has been working really, really hard on. I want to give special recognition to Margaret Scarsdale, who is from Pepperell but represents Groton and Lunenburg and Townsend. But UMass Memorial Health announced this week that they are going to move forward with a standalone emergency room. And it's looking like it's going to be new construction to fill that void left by Neshoba Valley Medical Center and the collapse of the Stewart healthcare system. So, as a legislature, we've taken some significant actions. At the end of the last legislative session in late December, we passed some really key reforms that are going to prohibit private equity from being able basically just to bilk the value out of our healthcare system again. We've increased reporting requirements, and we've also done a lot to prohibit the real estate trusts that were formed, which basically sold out the Neshoba Valley Medical Center and the Stewart healthcare system out from under itself for some very greedy people's personal profit. But I am very excited to continue to work to reestablish some of those key services. And there was no service that perhaps was more important and irreplaceable than accessible emergency department services for people from Pepperell and Townsend and Groton. And so this is going to be a 18-month to 2-year time frame. But it's also something that we can build services out around as the region continues to grow, and we are growing. We're growing at Devens, we're growing in a lot of the towns, moving from Metro West into North Central. So I'm excited about that work, and I'm grateful that UMass Memorial's made a commitment to stand up those services.
And I want to take this opportunity to lift up especially our fire chiefs and our EMS workers who have really been highlighting kind of what this like cascading effect of the closure of that emergency room means for kind of services across the whole region, in Leominster, in Clinton, in Worcester, just how that one spot in Ayer really was integral to making sure our entire emergency care system worked.
And there are so many parts of that system that have been under stress since the closure. Longer travel times for patients, longer waiting times once they reach an emergency department. Here in Leominster, ER visits are up 20% since the closure. In an already full ER that was operating at capacity. What Dr. Dixon at UMass told us last week was that we don't have places for people to go. And then just the stress on fire departments, right? I mean, it's essentially an unfunded mandate when you're taking these ambulances out of commission on longer trips, and so there's been significant stress for cities and towns at the local EMS level. One thing that I'm happy that the administration did was they provided approximately $250,000 grants to help cities and towns, 8 cities and towns who are most affected, build capacity in their EMS system. But we haven't been able to address the costs that have been incurred on the cities and towns. So I'm actually going in for a meeting with some other lawmakers and fire chiefs from the delegation tomorrow in the State House with Chief Sidlow from Leominster to talk about how the state can do a little bit more and get some help to our cities and towns. And as we move kind of out of the formation of the legislature in the opening months here of the new session and into budget season, I think that's going to be a key priority for me. And before I forget, I want to mention too that the funds that we both secured last year in last year's budget finally were received by the city, and the city is finally being able to provide some relief for the Leominster floods. So.
So if you are someone who was still impacted by the Leominster flood and you're looking for how to access those funding, reach out to our offices, reach out to the mayor's office. They're establishing kind of the guidelines on how to distribute that $500,000 to the community right now. And the only other thing I'm thinking about as we're wrapping up our time is a conversation that we started last session with the housing bond bill, but housing, I think, is the top of everyone's mind in terms of what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that there's enough housing for everyone who needs it and come up with a sustainable plan? And there's so much already underway in Leominster and Fitchburg, but we've got to build upon.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, and you serve in this caucus too, is being a member of the Gateway Cities Caucus, which are 26 cities that are very much, and Fitchburg and Leominster are two of them, but kind of the old mill towns who are need to reimagine, revitalize themselves. And I think at the heart of that revitalization and attracting jobs and having a community where everybody belongs and everybody can afford to live is more housing. And so both the House and Senate came together and we passed a historic bond bill. So there's a historic amount of resources that we're going to be able to work together on to direct new construction and new housing and to rehab and refit our public housing stock, which is aging and needs a lot of investment.
I just had one of my senior coffee hours this morning. It was a hot topic of when are those $2 billion going to actually hit? So
there's a lot of work to do. What I'm grateful of is I think where we live in North Central Massachusetts, people recognize that we need to build more housing if we're going to solve this crisis. And we don't see the levels of NIMBYism that we see in other places. But I know one of the projects that you've been leading on is pursuing veterans housing in downtown. I think that's an example of something that is a win for the community, for our veteran population, that will help us get at the housing crisis. And I think working public-private partnerships wherever we can to help sustain that is we're going to continue to be focused on in the next couple of years here.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for your leadership on the Gateway Cities Caucus. It is really important when we can all speak with one voice to really wield the voices of our constituents, and there's a lot of opportunity in Gateway Cities that often goes untapped that we can leverage. We're coming up on the end of our time. I just want to thank you, Senator Cronin, for taking some time to be with us, and looking forward to getting going with the new session.
Thank you, Representative. It's always a pleasure to be here on your show, and look forward to continuing to work together. I can't believe we're starting our third term representing Leominster together, but I couldn't ask for a better partner, and we'll continue to have some fun.
Awesome.
And deal with everything else. Yeah.
The good thing is we have a really, really strong, cohesive delegation, so we can lean on each other.
Absolutely.
And I would like an easier session than the last session we had.
Don't count on it.
No more crises. But thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next month, and I hope you are all doing well. Take care.